Weight is weight, angles are angles, mind-muscle connection is mind-muscle connection, intensity is intensity. Hello everyone, so this video is a response to various requests and comments about how somebody can be extremely muscular and ridiculously strong without ever going into a facility known as a gym. I use the jungle gym. It's a much bigger, more dynamic gym, but I understand people's skepticism when you become conditioned to seeing super muscular people only pretty much living in these man-made facilities, so the mind starts to associate it that way, and you sort of become disconnected from the basics. Let me go into the basics. I mentioned them at the beginning of the video. Over a backdrop here of various examples of just using the jungle, as well as other things. You'll see objects that don't come from the jungle, because the point is that objects, angles, leverages, challenges for muscles, these things are all everywhere. They exist everywhere. Now, granted, where I am, I can stack boulders. I can, build things out of logs. I can rig things up on cables. I can rig up simple machines. I can get underneath a car and lift it up and down. Nobody's watching. Nobody's calling the cops. These objects that I use are part of nature and part of our land, or just things we have laying around. So I realize if you're in the middle of a city, you can't just go out and pick up the local dumpster and start repping it out without probably getting in some kind of possibly trouble, or at least interfered with by people's bewilderment about what you're doing, because those objects are all owned by somebody. Everything's all about ownership in a synthetic environment, of course. So I'm not saying it would be as easy to build muscle, perhaps, where you are as it is where I am, but it's still possible. You can just use what you have in your environment. In other words, a person does not need a gym whatsoever. The world is your gym. Once you've learned certain things. A big one here is the mind-muscle connection I talk about sometimes, where I actually encourage people on any exercise that's not a dynamic, dangerous exercise. If you can close your eyes, even reduce the weight you're used to using on that exercise for the sake of learning mind-muscle connection, and close your eyes and flex the muscles you're using really hard, and make sure that your body position puts all the pressure right where you want it. So this is done internally. You're not looking in a mirror. You're not being distracted by somebody else watching you. You're just feeling it for yourself, and you're targeting it right where you want it to be. That right there is a simple pulley mechanism I put on a tree branch just for an idea, right? Get some cable pulls and tricep push downs, stuff like that. So anyway, back to mind-muscle connection. If you can master your own mind-muscle connection with each of your muscle groups, then you can feel when something is training them right. So say you rig up an exercise and you're not satisfied with how it's hitting a certain muscle, but you understand enough about what you're trying to do that you know what you're aiming for. So you can rig that exercise differently. You can try different body positions. You can try different angles. You can see I use a lot of lever arms. This allows you to do things. For example, let's say you're doing a stiff leg deadlift on a lever arm. You can actually put your feet further forward and stick your butt back further and emphasize the stretch and the pull and the intensity on your hamstrings way more, because you don't have to balance a free weight while you're doing it. Okay, so when you just experiment and tinker with things in your environment, you figure out what any apparatus, a log, a tree, a rock, some object, anything of any shape. You look around for things where you can get your heels elevated, or your, different angles to attack things from. You find objects that you can use for different exercises. Remember, what really builds muscle is the intensity also. It's the mind-muscle control of targeting the muscle you want to target, and it's how intense you take it. People go into these gyms and spend all this money on all the world's most expensive, fancy equipment, and, a lot of the time they never reach any intensity threshold in any muscle group to really make it into anything that special. So, all the money and all the investment and all the lost money and time and all the, having to join some gym cult and sign up for 5 years or else or whatever, and all these things, do they really serve you well? Now, granted, I could go into the gym and use their fancy equipment and just make my life easier than ever for building masses of muscle if that's what I wanted to do, if that's a lifestyle I was interested in. But honestly, I prefer the unbalanced surfaces and the extra challenges of everything in nature being more dynamic, because it not only can I build muscle mass, but it's much more functional and dynamic, and I use that. I have to hang out of trees and chop other things out of trees while I'm hanging out of them. I have to do a lot of real life stuff on steep ground and everything. So for me, the dynamics of training without a gym, once you develop enough skill and focus to do so, it's actually far superior in a functional sense. If your only goal is to build as much muscle mass as possible, it probably would be worth it to have a gym membership and use all the fanciest machines and everything. It just makes it easier. A lot of these things I do, I have to rig up simple machines, and there's a setup process, and later I got to clean it up. So a lot of people say living in what I call society, you wouldn't have time for all that anyway. So there's perks to either path, but my path is having a whole lot of functional muscle and extreme strength and doing it all out in nature in dynamic situations. And I really love that. It allows me to be creative, allows me to be in a flow state. I don't have, people around watching me asking silly questions, distracting me. So it's really enjoyable. And I like to upload some of it just to give people ideas, but people ask a lot of questions. They seem confused. So again, let me just summarize. Weight is weight. It doesn't, your muscles don't care what the mass is made out of. They're feeling the weight, they're feeling the intensity. Angles are angles. Mind muscle connection is mind muscle connection. That's how well you can control what you're doing to put extra pressure on the muscle or muscles that you're targeting. And, intensity is intensity. You can use intensity techniques. You can just take each set to a real intense level if you're into what you're doing and you're focused. And none of these awesome scientific factors that help you purposefully upgrade your biology into something better require a gym or a gym membership. Isn't that cool? So let me comment on some things here. That's a leg press, an extremely overly heavy, ridiculous one because I just felt like it. There's something fun about doing some stupidly heavy leg presses once in a while. This is kind of a static hold, but when you're walking and the weight's bouncing up and down on your delts, I actually built quite a bit of delt muscle just moving things around the property that way. This is a swimming motion since shoulders are dynamic and you can move through the different heads of your lateral, a little bit of the anterior and posterior with that move. Here's a heavy stiff leg deadlift, because why not? And because it's on a lever arm, my feet are actually really further forward, so I'm stretching and targeting the hamstrings harder. They get really sore from stuff like this. And I've got enough mind muscle connection to not even use my glutes all that hard and really use my hamstrings dominantly when I'm doing stiff leg deadlifts. That's probably considered unusual or something, but with practice it can be done. You can learn to prioritize certain muscles on a move and deprioritize others. So if you practice these higher level aspects of what strength training really is, like true mind muscle connection, and then you look around your environment, start to access your creativity and understand what's around you, it's, based on your environment, it's practically limitless when you look at all the things around the world. In my environment, it's practically limitless, but think about prisoners who have been in a little tiny room with like a bed to elevate their feet or different body parts and a couple walls to push against and a door frame, maybe some iron bars to pull up against and everything. And a lot of those guys get more built than people out in society who have all these supplements and have all these gym memberships and have all this luxury, but they don't have the intensity or the focus, right? Those guys have nothing better to do to keep themselves sane, and a lot of them get pretty jacked using partial range of motion in the same basic exercises every day because they're putting in the work and they're making use of what they have. Now, if you're not in a tiny prison cell, you have so many more options what you can do. This one here, you'll see me pull up my arms into a static row so I can get an even deeper stretch on those hamstrings there in these reps and really burn them and stretch overload them. So these are all things that you're doing by thinking about what you're doing. You're not looking in a mirror. You're not showing off. You're not just slamming a weight like some other brochacho did it. You're being present with what you're doing, and the creativity knows no bounds once you unlock it and go further down that path. See some chest shrugs here. Best exercise I've ever come across for upper chest shelf as well as the inner chest depth of your Grand Canyon in your inner chest. At least the way I do them. I'm pulling up and I'm pulling across really hard and squeezing in. And that really fills out all these silly chests that are basically muscle that kind of looks like man boobs when it's relaxed because everybody's done so much benching. They have like a hanging lower chest. And most people don't really get a very good upper or inner chest just from a bunch of benching and stuff. Just throwing these ideas in here. Here's a real heavy front squat with a really awkward big weight that's much harder to hold than a tiny little barbell, so it puts the weight out further and challenges you much harder. Nature doesn't make things easier, guys, like man-made stuff. Nature makes things harder and more dynamic, and that's why you get more out of it. Any muscle you gain in these dynamic scenarios is more functional and more capable muscle in all real life situations. So when you set yourself free from the matrix of gym training, I had to set myself free because I kept getting thrown out of gyms for doing creative and intense things anyway. That was a long time ago. I used to work in gyms. I used to be ACE personal trainer like a million years ago. I outgrew all that stuff. It's a shoe that just don't fit. Sometimes you got to go barefoot, like that scene right there, because no shoe fits. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But for me, the freedom and the creativity, man, there's no going back. And the functional strength capacity, it's just, man, it's off the chart compared to things done on flat surfaces and air conditioning with balanced weights and balanced machined objects that are not like anything in nature. Nothing in the real world is that. Nothing in the real world works that way. So I'm gonna stay with the real world path and keep showing you guys examples of things. Feel free to toy with any ideas you get from me. You take your own responsibility with it, of course. And once you develop your creative muscle a little bit, you're going to have more ideas and start figuring out how to hit more muscle groups. And some of these things are better, actually superior to any of the man-made conventional equipment that currently exists. I'm not joking. They really are. So keep that in mind. Yes, it requires a higher level of acuity to learn to train without a gym, but when you do, what's possible is actually boundless as you get better at it, okay? That said, not telling anybody what to do, just kind of sharing from my experience and my perspective and giving you some insights into some of the things you guys see me doing sometimes. And you'll see a lot more. As long as this channel stands, I can't help but post some fun stuff here and there. So much love, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Be inspired. And over and out for now.